No Cooper Kupp, no Jalen Hurts, no Josh Allen, no Justin Jefferson, but DFS will still be played this week. I'm here with Devin Knotts and John Lee, and we're here to tell you who to play in the bye week gauntlet. But before we get into position by position, we're going to go to Vegas like we always do. So let's go straight to John Lee to tell us about the Vegas layout this week. John, tell us about the highest scoring games and teams and who we should be playing and avoiding for our plays this week.
Yeah, maybe you should have led with the lowest scoring teams because Vegas is not pretty this week on the main slate. The highest projected team has a total of 28 points. That's my Dallas Cowboys. Dak Prescott is returning to play, or at least we're led to believe, against Detroit's defense, which has been leaky, to say the least, throughout the year.
They suck.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We're starting off on the right foot tonight, Devin and I. At the top of the Vegas value chart this week, you've got 5 home favorites, all ranging anywhere from 5 to 7 points. Those in order are the Dallas Cowboys, the Chargers, the Bengals, Ravens, and Raiders. And so you're going to have some running backs there who are of interest. I don't know. Dallas is an interesting situation because of the split between Zeke and Tony Pollard, but Austin Eckler's right there. Just behind him, Joe Mixon. Baltimore, we'll talk about Baltimore. I've got a take there. And then Las Vegas is bringing the chalk of the week, I believe, at least as of Thursday night with Josh Jacobs. That said, there's not a lot to love this week. There's one game that's touching 50 points. That's the Chargers hosting the Seattle Seahawks. And there are, I believe, 7 teams who are projected to score less than 20 points. Typically doesn't set up for a really exciting week. That said, we still play the game, and they're still going to give away over $1 million on DraftKings and FanDuel this weekend. So we're here. We're going to talk about it, and we'll walk through it.
So let me ask you this, and John, so we do have our Vegas picks to make, except we're reducing to one Vegas pick this week, and it is John because John is undefeated this year. And I anticipate John will stay undefeated for the full year. So we're going to keep the segment alive for as long as John has a 0 in the loss column. So put a pin in that real quick, John. We'll come right back to your pick. But in order to expedite the show, we're only going with him because his picks have been good and ours haven't. But I guess, guys, let's think about this as we go throughout the show. With the NFL, scoring in general is down. Big plays are down. Touchdowns are down. Everything's down, right? So are we really trying to focus now on volume instead of looking at guys that are just big play, kind of touchdown guys to break ties? I mean, I know we always put an emphasis on volume, but with fewer touchdowns going around, is that changing your methodology at all? So it's something to think about as we go through the show. Devin, why don't you touch on that, and then we'll get John's sure to win Vegas pick.
I mean, in cash, yeah, I think you always want the volume. You always want the touches and just hope the touchdowns balance themselves out across the year. But if touchdowns are down, aren't they more at a premium, and therefore you want to chase them in GPPs? Right. So if you only have 50 touchdowns across the week and you get 7, you're in a pretty good spot. So I don't know that I would change all that much. I think that, certainly the big play guys are more risky. I think what's fascinating is at the quarterback position, particularly like on a site like FanDuel, you're not seeing, and I guess DraftKings too, but you're not seeing like 350 yards and 4 touchdowns very often. Like there seems to be more of a premium on the rushing quarterbacks. You look at Josh Allen, you look at Lamar Jackson, and you look at Jalen Hurts, and all 3 of those guys on a points per game basis have outscored their other quarterbacks by a fairly significant margin. And a lot of that has to do with the rushing upside. So I do think that there's a paradigm shift a little bit. The NFL is cyclical, and I mean, you'd be able to just plug in like Eli Manning back in the day and like have a 40 or 50% chance of hitting a 300-yard bonus. Now it's like, Mahomes has done it once, maybe twice.
Do you remember last week when people wanted to play Geno Smith? But you didn't have to.
I did play Geno Smith, but yeah, it's Mahomes has done it. He's done it twice. He did do it last week, but Mahomes, like for a while there, was doing it almost every week. Derek Carr was doing it. Kirk Cousins was doing it. Those guys just aren't doing it this year.
Yeah, I think you're seeing a lot of like the too high cover shells and teams just letting opponents run on them rather than just give up long touchdowns. And so I guess in general, it's not changing your strategy. It's just kind of a blip on the radar, and we're still seeking volume, seeking targets in those things. So it's good to know. But I know it's just a narrative around the NFL these days. So I wanted to hit it right away before we get into the positions. All right, John, the much anticipated 5-0 John Lee. Tell us who will win us the money this week.
Well, I mean, we'll see what happens. But the New York Giants are 5-1. Folks are wondering whether this team is for real. The line against they are traveling to Jacksonville this weekend. The line opened up at the Giants getting 1.5 from a Jaguars team that I believe is 3-3. Could be wrong. I'd have to look. But the Jags are 3-3. Giants are 5-1, riding high, coming off wins against the Ravens last week, and I think the Packers the week prior in England. And 2/3 of the money currently on the Giants, and yet the line moves in the opposite direction. If you've been watching the past 6 weeks, that's something that really triggers me. And in terms of the matchup, if you really dig into the personnel matchups there, the Giants, and I urge you to do this. We have a defensive points against on page on Footballguys. If you go on there and look, the Giants haven't faced anybody in terms of actual like wide receivers. I think the best wide receiver they faced all season, CeeDee Lamb, with Cooper Rush throwing to him like 3 weeks ago. And in terms of running backs, they faced some decent running backs, but they've given up well over 100 yards in most weeks. And this week they get a Jacksonville Jaguars team, young, but I think they're better than advertised. Give me the Jags. I've got them -3 at home against the New York Giants.
And by the way, the Jags are 2-4, not 3-3, which almost bolsters your case even more as to why is that line going that way. So, knowing how John makes his picks, I am completely unsurprised, but I also like it, which maybe should, given my record, should make people like it less. Let's move on to positions. Or I'm sorry, yeah, John, we did Vegas. Let's move on to positions and go. Devin, why don't you kick us off at quarterback? And if you have any thoughts just on the slate in general, that lead you to your quarterback. I know sometimes we like to pick those skill position guys first, receivers, running backs, and then fit the quarterback in. So if you have any context, feel free to throw that out there too.
Yeah, it's an interesting week because we started at the top and we talked about there's not those top end guys. There's not the Justin Jeffersons. There's not the Stephon Diggs. There's not Cooper Kupp. There's not Jalen Hurts. There's not Josh Allen.
AJ Brown.
Brown. There you go. So what that's done is it's raised seemingly the floor of almost every wide receiver that's out there, which has made it somewhat difficult to find value, but we'll get into that in a little bit. But I'm taking a middling approach this week in trying to take a more balanced lineup. And I'm not going to sing. We're not going to do it. We're not going to do it. It's Dak Prescott week. Quarterback. What? You want me to sing?
We're not going to sing?
It's return of the Dak.
There you go.
No, we're not going to sing today. Twitter spoken. I put a poll out there, and over 50% did not want me to sing. So we're going to listen to the people for once.
The people don't know.
No, the people suck and they're no fun. But that's a great way to get people to care about the show. But Dak Prescott. So he looked awful in week 1. No denying that. Facing a good Tampa Bay defense. Kind of just dinking and dunking a little bit before going out with an injury. However, he's still a player that I trust pretty well. I mean, this is a offense that looked okay with Cooper Rush. And Cooper Rush, like, do we really think he's going to be that good? Or do we think he's that good? I don't. And facing Detroit, which Detroit, talking about that tool that John was referring to, 320 yards to Geno Smith, 337 yards to Carson Wentz. They allowed 25 fantasy points to Jalen Hurts. And then last week or 2 weeks ago, they looked okay against Bailey Zappi, but that was a 29-0 shellacking. So I think that Dak is going to come out. I think they're going to get this offense right. You have a great stacking partner in CeeDee Lamb, and we'll talk about him, I'm sure, because of his price at 6,700. But he's the cash game guy for me this week. GPPs, I think there's two options for me. I think one is Lamar Jackson, paying up at 8,000. We talked about how there's not a lot of value. This Cleveland run defense in general is just horrific. Austin Eckler tore them up. The Caleb Huntley and Tyler Algier tore them up. And Ramondre Stevenson had 80 yards and a touchdown. I know he was disappointing a little bit, but they still put up 38 against the Browns. I don't think they can stop Lamar Jackson running the ball. So I think Lamar Jackson has a 100-yard rushing upside. And then going down one more, I'm going back to Geno Smith at 5,600. What's the guy got to do to raise his price, to be honest?
Maybe score more than 19 at home against Arizona.
Yeah, but okay. So
no, I'm with you. He's dirt cheap. I'm with you.
He sucked last week, right? 197, no touchdowns. I get it. But the 3 games prior to that, 268-3, 320-2, 325-2. He has as many 300-yard games as Patrick Mahomes. He's putting up numbers that are better than Russell Wilson last year, and he's 5,600. Going up against a Chargers defense that's benched J.C. Jackson, who they paid like $90 million, and they've put him on the bench, which is shocking. And this game could be a shootout. So I think they're stacking on both sides. If Seattle's going to stay competitive, their defense sucks too. So if they're going to stay competitive, it's going to be on the arm of Geno Smith.
Yep. Okay. I'm with you. Despite the comment,
and he has rushing upside. He had 48 yards rushing last week. So
good point.
It's a guy that I want to target
in case of emergency, break glass. John, how about you? And then I had a question on a similarly priced gentleman to Dak Prescott, but I'll save that in case you don't mention him.
Well, I've got 4 quarterbacks written on my list, and 3 of them Devin has spoken about. So we're, I think, largely aligned, which is scary to me. But nonetheless, I have Lamar Jackson as my cash game quarterback this week against Cleveland, largely for the same reasons that Devin's already talked about. The fact that he continues to run significantly. I think last week was his least number of rush attempts on the season, and it was 7 for 77 yards, I believe. He's just a guy that's going to put up points. And although there's not a lot of value on the slate this week, there's the opposite is also true. There's not a lot of very expensive players that I feel like I need to have. And for that reason, I can spend up at quarterback and still feel pretty good about the remainder of my roster. If I drop down a little bit, the name that he didn't mention that I would be willing to play in cash is Justin Herbert. He's a guy that started off the season pretty hot, 280 yards, 3 touchdowns, 330 yards, 3 touchdowns, and more recently he's played some bum teams. He's played Houston, Devin, Cleveland, and Denver. So 2 out of the past 3 teams, poor offenses to go against. So there wasn't a real impetus for them to throw. This week, this game is probably the most attractive game on the slate. He and Geno should be going back and forth. I think he easily gets there. My 2 GPP quarterbacks are Dak Prescott and Geno Smith. I won't go into why because I think Devin covered it nicely. So it sounds like we're largely aligned there. Although that does maybe beg the question, what ownership is going to look like heading into the weekend if, Devin and I, who always disagree, actually agree on the majority of the quarterbacks in these slots.
Yeah, and the one guy that I kind of semi-teased earlier, he's showing up pretty high on our DFS single lineup builder is Joe Burrow, who seemed to, get his swagger back, pardon the really bad cliche, last week in New Orleans. So Burrow is only 200 more than Dak. He's certainly been playing football for the last 6 weeks, so you could argue he's not rusty. The only thing for me there is Atlanta maybe slows the game down so much that he doesn't get into a shootout. But you guys have any thoughts on Burrow, given that he's kind of right up there with Dak too?
I can speak for myself here. I looked at him earlier. I'll talk about it in a bit. T. Higgins looks like a decent play for me, and Hayden Hurst also looks like a decent play. And so if I'm running Joe Burrow in stacks, it's likely going to be a double stack with him and running it back with a guy like Drake London or Kyle Pitts. But there's, I don't know. I think based on what I'm seeing, and I might as well talk about it now. I was really surprised tonight when I started uploading the numbers and looking at the model. Either early week ownership is extremely off base, or this week DraftKings has done an excellent job in pricing. And I don't know what it is, but tonight there is not a lot of some weeks stuff just jumps off the page. This is a great GPP play. This is a terrible GPP play. Things are really close this Thursday night, more so than they've been in, I'll say, 2 or 3 years. So I really don't know what's driving that. But I'm hoping that over the weekend, after folks start talking, and we've talked about it on this show a number of times. I know, Devin, maybe I'll prompt you. I know some folks were asking about how percent rostered changes going into the weekend, and you said you might speak to it. So maybe this is an appropriate time. But I'm hoping that, like most weeks, it does move, because as of tonight, it's pretty tight.
Yeah, outside of Josh Jacobs, which we'll talk about in a minute,
Yes.
I have him getting up to close to 30%, which is probably higher than some other sites have him. I think there's a couple wide receivers who get north of 15, but like to your point, it normally you have probably like 3 or 4 per position that are hovering around 20%. And this week, like, I have 2 running backs above 15%. I have 2 wide receivers above 15%. And I have 2 quarterbacks above 10%, which, like, I look at last week and we had much higher numbers than that. So to put together roster percentages, it's part art, part science. I mean, you have to look at projections compared, like a cost value tracker, as far as what not only Footballguys has, but how people are viewing different players across the industry in terms of projections, and thinking that the highest value players are certainly going to be in a higher percentage of lineups. And then there's a trickle down effect too, where not going to get too much into it, but trickle down effect where if a top end quarterback is very popular, then you can't really have a super popular wide receiver or super popular running back as much so if there's a value quarterback that would be popular. And then there's also components of trying to listen to what other people are saying, which is the art part of it, as far as taking a best guess as far as some of the more popular programs and podcasts and what they're talking about as far as players, because those programs do have an impact on roster percentages. So certainly, I think it's a lot of guesswork. I think we get pretty close. A lot of people get pretty close, but you're never going to have an exact science as far as trying to get. Some weeks you'll be wildly off because there were just things that were done that you just can't really explain.
Yeah, just one more, maybe an addendum to this is, on any given week, like last week, we had a slew of value at running back, right? I mean, it was a bunch of probably 4 or 5 running backs that just looked like shoe-ins. And so what that did was drive ownership of expensive wide receivers, because you were saving so much money at running back. And, so on the value on a given slate, where it falls actually drives ownership as well. You may not like Cooper Kupp, but if you're going to have $5,000 extra on your roster, you're going to go from a Zay Jones to a Cooper Kupp just simply because you can. So there's a lot of different factors here, and I know people get frustrated by what's behind the curtain, but it's a complicated process. And at the end of the day, the best thing I can tell everybody is to check in on Sunday morning, because that's when they're most accurate.
Yeah.
All right,
And John,
so Ryan starting. Joe Burrow.
Just real quick, please don't ever say Cooper Kupp and Zay Jones in the same sentence again.
No, I had to give you a $4,400 guy.
All right, go ahead.
Going back to your question, Joe Burrow is one of my favorite players in the league. I look for reasons to play him. I will play him, but right now the numbers are I would say very mediocre on him.
Okay.
With the exception of T. Higgins, I think is a strong play right now, and Hayden Hurst, who it looks okay. He scored touchdowns in his previous 2 games, but last week came up with a goose egg.
Let's have the highest prop on the board.
What was that?
Highest prop on the board, which those are all over the place early in the week, but Joe Burrow is at 287.5.
Yeah. Yeah. So to me, the question I should have probably framed it better was more cash game wise, like, especially compared to Dak. So, so we know where we stand on Burrow. I think he's viable in comparison to Dak, especially if you just have a little bit of hesitancy on a player who hasn't played in a long time. So, all right, let's move on, guys.
You see my initials up there? Do you really think I'm going to be playing a Joe Burrow?
He did sneak a middle initial in this week for the first time ever, which is very, very clever.
It's Dak week, baby.
It is #Dak week. So it used to be Zeke week, now it's Dak week. And by used to be, that was years and years ago. All right, so let's move on to running backs. Really great discussion there, guys. Thanks for all the insight on the game theory and ownership percentages and things like that. So before we move to running backs, I just want to ask everybody, use those YouTube comments to tell us which pick you like and dislike. Feel free to comment on feeling offended by Devin telling you that you suck. That'd be good too. So please like and dislike our show, comment, engage. We're happy to do our part in that engagement as well. So we look forward to it each and every Friday and certainly into the weekend. Let's move on to running backs. Actually, let's sum up quarterbacks because we did take a minute there. So Devin, it's Dak week, obviously. John says Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, cash, and then Dak and Geno Smith and GPPs. And Devin says Dak and cash, and then Jackson and Smith and GPPs. So the quarterback pool is pretty shallow this week if you're just playing the plays of these guys, which, that might make life easy on you. Moving to running backs, DeAndre Swift had a bye week. We know he missed a lot of time before. Reports are that he's, quote, pushing towards playing. So keep an eye on that. Got in a limited practice on Wednesday. J.K. Dobbins left the game against the Giants on Sunday with some knee tightness and didn't practice Wednesday. So let's keep an eye on that. Maybe Kenyon Drake is a good play again. Probably not, but he's the next guy up, I think. And it looks like Jonathan Taylor will return for Indy. So the dream of playing a third string running back who might catch 10 passes is over apparently. So guys, tell us who you like at running back. Obviously, Josh Jacobs is there. What are we doing with Josh Jacobs? Just maybe a quick yes or no, and then let's move on to some other plays. John, how about you get us started?
Yeah, I mean, Josh Jacobs is the most he's the easiest pick on the slate this week.
Yeah.
Period. He's going up against Houston, probably the worst fantasy defense against running backs this season. I did look that up, but if it's not, it's the top 3.
I'll check it while you go.
Yeah. So he's getting a slew of carries there. So just slot him in. He's 6,500. He's the free space this week. And then it's a pretty big drop to a handful of guys. I'll tell you the guys, and then I'll tell you the ones that I like. Kenneth Walker, Joe Mixon, Breece Hall, Dameon Pierce, all kind of in that threshold. I'm going to go with, for cash games, we're still talking cash. Kenneth Walker and Joe Mixon are my guys this week. Mixon's going up against the Chargers, and the Chargers, I think, are also in that same realm of bottom 3 defenses against running backs. And then Mixon, he just gets so much. And I will grant that he hasn't looked great in recent memory, but he's still going up against an Atlanta Falcons defense as a touchdown home favorite. And I just I see him breaking out at some point. So those would be the 3 guys that I would be thinking about for cash games on DraftKings.
Yeah, and as a follow-up, Houston is the worst in points per game so far to running backs. The Chargers are 4th worst. So
there you go.
Devin, do you agree? And if not, who do you like?
I mean, I like Josh Jacobs. I think he's the most obvious play of the slate. I can't do Kenneth Walker. I just can't. The guy doesn't catch passes, and that's the biggest problem for me.
I was going to ask that very question to John, so that's good that you answered it.
I understand he had a good game last week. I get it, but in a 19-9 win in which Arizona seemingly looked incompetent to move the ball, they gave him the ball. What?
You're anticipating a big game out of Atlanta then?
I think Atlanta's better than Arizona, but
wait.
No, they're playing the Chargers, aren't they?
Yeah, Seattle plays the Chargers.
Yeah, so
they can move the ball.
What if the Chargers get up early?
Correct.
That's my worry. Is like he doesn't catch. He's not a good receiver, and I'd rather take a guy like. I understand the price is good at 5,800, but like to me, I'd rather pay $400 more for Breece Hall, who has been like unbelievable this year. The last couple of weeks, he's been catching the ball. He's been running the ball. I'm trying to pull up his stats as I'm filibustering, but he's a guy that I trust just because the sample size is a little bit more. I guess he's only caught 2 passes in each of his last 4 games, but
3 games.
The same number that Ken Walker caught last week?
Yeah, but Walker didn't catch passes at Michigan State. So, maybe it's my college bias that I have there, but
well, the argument for Hall is that he caught passes earlier in the season. The argument against Hall is that he caught them from Joe Flacco, not Zach Wilson.
Yeah.
So now in the first 3 games, he had 13 catches. He also had a total of 21 carries. In the last 3 games, he only has 6 catches, but he has 55 carries. So, I mean, he's still getting touches. We know targets are worth more than carries, but 55 carries in 3 games is a pretty good workload.
The offense might have 35 plays, and I don't think I'm exaggerating too much there. That game is going to be such a slog. I mean, honestly, the total went from 43 to 38. It opened 43, dropped to 38. You've got Denver's defense. I'm not saying he's a bad play. I just, we talk about floors for cash games, and I mean, I like Breece Hall. He's a talented guy. He looks good as a rookie, 7 games into the season, 6 games into the season. But give me the guy who's coming off of, a 110-yard week in his debut. The week prior to that, he had eight carries for 88 yards and a touchdown. I'd rather have him.
So I'll play devil's advocate and take door number 3. And, for $200 more than Breece Hall. What about Dameon Pierce in a game that will feature more plays and likely will feature more offense at Las Vegas?
Raiders have a top 5 run defense.
He's going to get 18 carries. He's going to get, 5-6 targets. He's the only guy that plays, right?
Yeah, but
so I guess that's where we're at this week is you could, you could poke holes in or make an argument for all 3 of those guys. Cause I'm with you. Pierce has the volume and the matchup stinks. Hall has the volume, but the play volume stinks. And then Ken Walker has the volume, but he stinks. So I guess,
well, we don't know. Right. So I'm not saying Walker stinks. I want to make that very clear.
I know. I know.
We just don't.
It just
know.
felt right to say.
We just don't know, and I think his floor is pretty low. Given if they fall behind, does DJ Dallas get a lot of the work? Maybe.
He's had 5. His most touches this year have been 5 touches, I mean, last week, you guys, I think you said on this show, you thought that he was a threat and he got 2 touches.
But they were ahead the entire game.
Fair.
Going up against a better offense, if they fall behind 7, 10, 14, nothing, what's the line in that game?
So the take home here is there aren't a lot of good running back plays outside of Josh Jacobs.
So knowing that, guys, can you find a way to fit in a Austin Eckler or Christian McCaffrey and feel good about it anywhere else in your lineup? Doesn't sound like yes.
Well, I think
I'm sorry.
I think you could.
Go ahead.
I think you certainly can. I think it's picking which running back you want to take. I'm not touching Christian McCaffrey as far at all. PJ Walker had 16 passes for 60 yards last week, and I know Christian McCaffrey caught 7 of those 10, but no,
it's a tough scene.
Absolutely not. I mean, in a GPP, you could certainly do it, but not in cash if you're going to pay up. If I'm paying up this week, I'm probably going with Saquon Barkley going up against Jacksonville.
Whoa.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Helmet throws over.
7,900, so he's a little bit cheaper. We saw what Deion Jackson, whoever the hell that guy is, go for 141 yards, 100 whatever, against this Jacksonville defense. Dameon Pierce had 113 yards, and Miles Sanders had 166 yards. This Jacksonville defense is not particularly good. And I know we talked about Jacksonville being a 3-point favorite, but that still means
should they be? Yeah.
Well, fine. Let's just say that they are, but the Giants are still going to have to score. And what's their only path to scoring? It's Saquon Barkley. So at 7,900, I think it's a pretty good discount. But if I'm paying up, that's probably the way that I'm going.
John. Yeah, I'm not paying up. I look at the pay up options this week are Austin Eckler, Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, and Saquon, all in that $8,000 range. And they're only, I mean, I'm looking at them, they're 19.7 to 20.7 points. The guys we were debating earlier are projected for like 2 to 3 points less, and yet they come at $3,000 discount. I'd rather miss on a $3,000 discount than miss on the guys that are more expensive.
Yeah, I agree. And there's no, God, I hate to say Zay Jones again, but you're just not playing Zay Jones. You shouldn't be, at least. So there's no mid 4K guy this week that looks as good as some non-Zay Jones 4K guys we've had in prior weeks. So wrapping up running backs, let's do that real quick. Josh Jacobs, Lock City, and then John likes Ken Walker and Joe Mixon. I agree with the Mixon call, especially his usage has been really good. Touchdown regression just has to come eventually. And it's a game there at home and should be favored. Devin likes Breece Hall and Saquon Barkley. John, any real quick, just because we're already, we're getting deep in the weeds here, but any GPP plays, contrarian guys that you're thinking of here before we move on to receivers?
There are not a whole lot, and I'll just give 2 quickly in terms of numbers only. I won't get a whole lot in detail, but if Devin's initials catch on and Dak does become super popular, Zeke Elliott's still getting a lot of action. He's not the player he was a few years ago, but his price reflects it at $6,000. He's coming out on the model as being a decent play this week. The other one is A.J. Dillon, who he burned me last week. So, it's once bitten, twice shy type of thing. But against the Washington Commanders, they're away favorites by about 5. I look for, by the end of the year, A.J. Dillon to be the premier back there in Green Bay. He's 5,600. Those are 2 GPP plays.
John loves running backs who catch 1 to 2 passes per game. Ezekiel Elliott, Kenneth Walker, and A.J. Dillon.
Yeah, shout out Boston College.
One name, Aaron Jones on FanDuel at 6,800
there
is
you
a
go.
Stupid price. So he's going to be extremely popular.
Just right after the A.J. Dillon call. I know it was FanDuel specific, but very funny.
I should have mentioned it earlier. So.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
He's 7,600 on DraftKings and 6,800 on FanDuel, which is whenever a player is lower on FanDuel, you should always at least look at them.
Just for the record, A.J. Dillon was second on the team in catches last week. Just saying.
Thanks, Sean.
Yeah,
cool. A real low bar on that team. All right. Before we move to wide receivers, just a reminder, if you can, please subscribe, hit the bell, like the video. It really helps us out. And again, drives that interaction that we're happy to have with you guys. So thank you for doing that in advance. Let's move on to wide receivers. Some news. We talked a little bit about Chargers. It looks like their receiving core has some news. Keenan Allen got in a limited practice Wednesday. Rumor has it he should return this week from his long absence.
He made some weird comments though. He's like, if I need to hold out or if I need to, it might be the smart thing just to wait until after the bye next week. So I'm not convinced he's playing.
Yeah, keep an eye on. I agree. Keep an eye on it because especially with a bye. Without a bye, maybe not. But they got a bye next week. I mean, he heard it in week 1. It's been a long time. I know he aggravated it probably. Anyway, Josh Palmer, also of the Chargers, was concussed Monday night. Didn't practice Wednesday, so keep an eye on him.
Second of the year there, so I doubt he plays.
Yeah, very tough there. In Detroit, we had a lot of wide receiver news heading into their bye. It looks like Amon-Ra St. Brown, he was full practice Wednesday. It looks like he should return, whereas Josh Reynolds and DJ Chark didn't practice. So keep an eye on Detroit. I would expect St. Brown to go back to his target hog ways, but especially so if the rest of the receiving core is limited or doesn't play. John mentioned T. Higgins. He has that ankle injury. He played 86% of the snaps last week and caught, I think, like 10 passes, or at least had 10 targets. I apologize. It's not right in front of me. But he should be back at full strength. I wouldn't worry about him. And then Rashad Bateman of Baltimore with his midfoot injury got in a limited practice Wednesday. So keep an eye on Rashad Bateman, but he looks to be trending up as well. Guys, do any injuries, strike your fancy? Or if not, let's just go into it. John, kick us off. Or no, Devin, kick us off. Sorry, John.
I feel like every week is the same on DraftKings at wide receiver. And it's been that way at least since last year, where I'm mentioning 2 guys, and that's T. Higgins and Tyler Lockett. Yeah. They're both just always so cheap, and they refuse to raise their price. I'll start with Lockett. I know he has a hamstring injury, so I'll clarify that. He didn't practice on Thursday, left the game last week. So let's just be careful that make sure he plays. But in cash, throw last week out because he left early. 104 yards, 91 yards, 76 yards, 107 yards over his last 4 games. And at 5,800, that price is really, really strong. I think that if he plays, he's probably the chalk of the week. And we talked about J.C. Jackson being benched earlier. So he's certainly a guy that I'm looking at. Another guy T. Higgins, it seems like there's always something with him, an ankle injury, a hamstring injury, whatever it is. But the guy any given week can outproduce Jamar Chase. And is he 50-50 to outproduce Jamar Chase? No, he's probably 40-60 to do that on a given week. But every week he's seemingly cheaper by a considerable margin. So going up against Atlanta, we talked about Joe Burrow and his props earlier. I think he's in a really good spot. And then CeeDee Lamb is the last cash game guy that I would want to target this week. 6,800, solid price. Going up against the putrid Detroit defense. I know Dan Campbell wants to bite kneecaps, and they're a great story on Hard Knocks, but he's probably, would it shock anyone if they went 1-15 and he got fired this year? So they just can't play defense. So Lamb, I think, is in a really good spot to get back on track, especially with Dak back at quarterback this week. And then I'll come back for GPP plays, but I'll turn it over to John.
Dak back at quarterback. All right, John.
I was going to say the same thing, Ryan. I think Devin covered 3 out of the 4 guys in cash games. CeeDee Lamb, Tyler Lockett, T. Higgins.
That's a problem, by the way, a big problem, because if John and I are thinking the same way, everyone is thinking the same way.
Especially because you and I typically are not that aligned with these kinds of things.
My God, no.
The other player on my name, maybe it gives us, since we agree, maybe we can take a minute to talk about what's going on with that Buccaneers offense and Tom Brady. The other guy on my list in cash games is Chris Godwin. He hasn't caught a touchdown all year. He's got 7, 6, and 6 in the past 3 weeks since he came back from injury. I think he's a fine cash game play. but that sets up the larger conversation about what do you guys think about this Buccaneers offense? I mean, for me, this is the litmus test for whether or not they're, is Tom Brady washed up? I know last year I loved it. Every time Travis Kelce scores a touchdown, I think about how Devin called him out as washed up or done or something last year. Is Tom Brady done? Is this offense done? Because this week this is a litmus test, right? I mean, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, in Tom Brady's New England career, whenever they struggled, which was to say they lost a game and had a close game consecutively, they would go out and beat a weak opponent by a zillion points, right? So this is, if Tampa really is a contending team. I know older teams, they understand the value of peaking later, but from a narrative perspective, this is one you got to just go out and pound them. I mean, you're on the road, sure, but I mean, you really just got to focus and just go beat the hell out of Carolina, because there's just no resistance there. So it is a litmus test. I'm not predicting that they will. I would like to see it, though, if we're going to take this team very seriously going forward. I like Chris Godwin this week. His usage was up last week. He continues to get healthier, continues to be the most targeted player, or at least the easiest target to hit for Tom Brady. So I agree with you there. But I do think we need to open our eyes to the fact that this offense, maybe is dead, or at least disarmed, right? Or half of what we thought they would be.
Is
Godwin,
it though?
I'd still play Godwin this week, though.
Brady's still
what do
averaging
you think?
275 passing yards per game. So he's still putting up numbers, but he has 300 yard. Yeah,
That's
he has
surprising. That's actually
right.
Considering they ran so much.
He has a 350. Right. He has a 351 yard
and a
game and a 385 and 3 against the Chiefs. But the numbers aren't that bad. But what they don't have is they don't have the touchdown threats.
Yeah, they're not scoring.
Godwin seemingly is allergic to the end zone. He had 5 touchdowns last year. He has 0 this year. Mike Evans, they know he's getting double and triple teamed in the red zone. So and Leonard Fournette sucks. We know this.
Gronk
here we go.
Left. Is that the issue? I mean,
it could be
part of it. Sure. It's another guy to cover.
And their defense isn't as good as it's been in the last couple of years. But they're still priced pretty expensively. So I just don't know that I can go to Godwin given that the lack of touchdown upside. Well, he's going to score at some point. He's Jacoby Myers.
Play, just to be clear, it was the 3 wide receivers that you had referenced, and Godwin at 6,300. I mean, he basically guarantees you 2x because he's getting 6 and 60 every week. Yeah. And if he gets into the end zone, there's your 3x. And if he has a good day, you're probably getting 4.5x.
Yeah.
Okay. GPPs. Sorry, I know I sidetracked this. For me,
John's trying to host tonight, guys.
Well, because I knew we aligned so much on wide receivers there for cash that we had to.
Yeah, we do. We need more conflict for the people. So go with your upside.
I have a name that will spark some conflict.
Let's hear it. Tell me
Terry McLaurin.
Narrative Street with Taylor Heineke. I like
over 1,000 yards last year. He's going to be less than 5% rostered. Better situation. I mean, he had 34% of the total yards for Washington last year with Taylor Heineke at quarterback. I sort of like it. Sort of sneaky.
I don't hate it.
5,900.
He might not even make my player pool, guys. In fact, as of tonight, he would not.
Well, you said nobody's popping off, though.
But he's going to be in 1% of rosters, according to what I'm seeing.
Sneaky.
He's got a 4% chance of hitting 4x. For me, Romeo Doubs against Washington on the other side of the ball there. Randall Cobb's hurt, right? I don't know if we talked about that at the top, but Randall Cobb's hurt.
I did miss that. You're right.
Yep. I think that that funnels some additional action over to Romeo. Hunter Renfrow is a decent play for me this week up against Houston. Going back to that Tampa Bay game, we'll see what happens with percent roster going into the weekend, but I do like Mike Evans. He's got a great personnel matchup against Dante Jackson in Carolina, who's just given up. He's been blazed all year. And then I think Devin and I both talked about how popular CD Lamb, is going to be. And maybe that opens up some opportunity for Michael Gallup, who could be overlooked. Depends on how popular he goes going into the weekend as a potential double stack option.
I mean, yeah, if it's Dak week, there's got to be others.
DPJ is the best cheap receiver this week. Donovan Peoples-Jones, 74 yards, 50 yards, and 71 yards in his last 3 games. He's out yardaged Amari Cooper, and Baltimore's pass defense isn't as good as people think it is.
So it was either 2 or 3 weeks ago where I mentioned his name, and Devin went,
right.
That guy sucks. I mean,
he does.
Just vehemently against.
The whole Browns team sucks.
I mean, and just so everybody knows, we have a little chat that we have, before the show as we prep. And Devin even said, I mention talent just as much as I mention salary and situation. And then he has recommended 2 guys tonight that he hates in Saquon Barkley and Donovan Peoples-Jones. Yep. So DFS is about salary and situation as much as it is about talent. And Devin Knotts is here to tell you that. Donovan Peoples-Jones, that is one for the peoples, if you will. Any other wide receivers, guys, before people dwell on the
Is Denver ever going to be good? Are we just writing them off?
Yeah.
Jerry Jeudy's a good price.
Russ probably won't play, but is that good or bad? Who knows?
Probably good.
Yeah, maybe.
It can be worse. I mean, he's looked awful.
I mean, who's their running back? Mike Boone?
No. Latavius Murray.
Latavius.
And Mike Boone, who I needed to score like 4 points last week, got maybe 4 touches. Tough scene in Denver. It's a clown show there with the coaching.
McLaurin goes over 100 yards. Book it.
Ooh, all right. McLaurin with the bonus. That's a bold call.
I think DPJ gives you better value on your GPP rosters. So that's a better call.
All right. So let's recap wide receivers. Both guys like CeeDee Lamb, Tyler Lockett, T. Higgins. John says Romeo Doubs, Hunter Renfrow, Mike Evans, and GPPs. Devin says #DPJ and a GPP. And we'll go on from there, even though he, decried the player and his talent not 2 weeks ago. Moving on to tight ends. Before we do, please, as a reminder, check out footballguys.com/DFS. John's Vegas value chart, our single lineup builder, Devin's roster projections, among many, many features on the site that we have each week that get updated as the week progresses. Really good place to go Sunday morning. A great repository for content that's going to help you build your lineups as news breaks. Tight ends, guys.
News.
Devin has breaking news, please.
Andy Dalton has thrown 2 pick sixes.
He has. As someone who is invested in Kyler Murray, I saw 28-14, got really excited, and then I looked at the box score and I got mad. If you rewind about like 6 minutes and see me going, that was why. So just another behind the curtain there, Easter egg. All right, on to Sunday, since we shouldn't be talking about Thursday. Let's talk tight ends, guys. I think we're going to need value here. We don't have the 9K players, but we've talked about a lot of 6K and above players. So talk to us about what you're doing. John, you go first.
I think the most obvious play this week is Greg Dulcich. How do we say his name? I'm not even going to try.
Dulcich.
Who the hell is this guy?
He's the guy that scored the first touchdown on Monday Night Football this week, I believe.
He's the guy we thought Albert O would be.
Yes.
3 targets.
He's 2,500. For me, that's the
pretty
play. It's a total punt play. He gets three catches for 30 yards. You're happy with it. You move on. If you're paying up, I think Mark Andrews is the guy. He's wide, almost elite wide receiver 1 at 7,400. But I do think, given some of the questions we've had at the cash game position, I'm punting this position and trying to spend up elsewhere.
So
Devin,
can I ask a question?
Yep.
K. Dotton or Dulcich?
For me, it's Dulcich.
Even in a GPP where he's like going to be like 13% rostered?
I've got them. Excuse me. I've got them. I got one at 7 and the other at 9, so I don't think it's that much of a difference.
It's like one catch, right?
I'm talking about ownership.
Oh, okay.
And Dulcich is about 50% more likely to reach GPP value than Otten. So
I'd love to know how that's calculated based off of 3 targets for a year. Like,
well, it's based off of projections for this year, and it's based off of a decade worth of data that talks about upside.
Yeah, but the sample size is like as small as it possibly could be.
I think Dulcich is probably the better athlete and the guy more likely to get you a 30-yard touchdown, much like he did last week. So I was looking at Otten personally, but that's the conservative side of me.
Guys, the two highest ranked tight ends in terms of per dollar. So I don't think either one of them is a bad play. But if you're asking me which one comes out higher, it's Dulcich. And I mean, I already told you I hate that game. I guess what I hate more is Tom Brady. Is he going to trust Mike Evans or is he going to trust Cade Otton?
Or Chris Godwin or Leonard Fournette.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, especially if Russ Wilson doesn't play, you know, who's the quarterback there and who's he going to throw to? Is he going to throw, 20 yards down the field to Jerry Jeudy, or is he going to throw, short outs to the tight end? I don't know.
Top tight end this week. You guys
hold on. Tell us why it's David Njoku.
You guys know where I'm going.
It's obviously David Njoku. He wide receiver 1.
He has more yards than Mark Andrews over the last 3 games. And I get continually ripped the last 3 weeks for David Njoku.
If you keep calling him out, he'll eventually hit. So,
What do you mean he'll eventually hit? He's hit the last 3 weeks. He's been 4X the last 3 weeks.
Was he 4X last week, Ryan? I don't think he was.
He was 3 for 58. So I don't think
last week
4X.
he was about 3X.
He had
8.8 points on.
So he was $2,200 is what you're saying, cheaper than the site minimum.
It's your model's math.
No, it's not my model. My model knows math, and I want to say I could look it up, but I'm going to say he was over 3,000 last week. So
he was like 30. He might have been 4. So he was like 2.5x, but that's okay.
Rounding up.
Yeah, rounding error by like 1.5. That's all right. But I mean, look, 58 yards, 88 yards, 73 yards, 89 yards. You have to give me some credit here that he has been far and away better than most people have thought. And you guys were telling me he's outscored Tyler Higbee the last 3 weeks. And Higbee was like the premier chalk play, and I told you guys not to play him. So I'm going to pat myself on the back.
All right. Well, you're going to be happy to know, Devin, that David Njoku made my cut tonight for GPPs because he's going up against the Baltimore Ravens, who have allowed the third most touchdowns to opposing tight ends on the season. And they haven't played a good tight end, in my opinion. They played Daniel Bellinger, Hayden Hurst, Mike Gesicki, and Tyler Conklin. This will be the best tight end they played all season. And I do think that this is a week that Njoku could blow up. So we're on the same page. Just don't do it in cash.
Yeah, Gerald Everett's my GPP play this week. Donald Parham looks like he's going to miss, which leaves Everett as the red zone guy. Parham's like 6'9", so he gets a lot of those targets. But Everett should be someone who does get the targets at $4,000, especially if Keenan Allen and Josh Palmer and God knows who else is out on that team. I think Everett is a good enough athlete that Mike Williams disappears even when he's like the only guy at times. So if that's the case, then who else are they going to throw to? It's either DeAndre Carter or Gerald Everett.
Yeah.
Or Austin Eckler, I suppose. But
Monday night was the absolute worst. I needed like 11 points from Mike Williams and Mike Boone and got 3. combined.
Nobody cares about your fantasy
Just
team.
the worst. But it was dreadful. I mean, so Mike Williams, he disappears. I can attest. Although Pat Surtain, fairly good. So don't start your wide receiver ones against Denver. The Jets don't have one worth noting, though, so that's good. All right, to recap, John likes Dulcich over Otten in the battle for the punts. Devin likes Njoku in cash. John likes Njoku in GPP. And Devin likes Gerald Everett in GPPs. I kind of like that, too, because he wears number 7 and he looks like a wide receiver. So let's go with that in GPPs. Guys, let's move on to defenses very quickly. Start with Devin. Who do you got?
I need to go cheap here.
Indeed.
Jets.
Jets at Brett Rippin. Is that the answer?
I mean,
unless you have an extra $1,000, then go up to the Bucks and go against PJ Walker, who had 60 yards of passing last week.
Yeah, that's 1,300, not even 1,000. So that's a big jump.
Wow, I'm using Devin's model math.
I'd rather go, if I'm paying up, I'd rather go the Cowboys over the Bucks. And the reason there is I just don't even trust PJ Walker to throw the ball enough to get those scoring opportunities. Where we know Jared Goff is good for at least 1.5, 2 interceptions per game. The Cowboys lead the NFL in sacks. Scoring points isn't always a bad thing.
No. You're okay. So you're right, but I'm as a resident Cowboys fan here. What I worry about is the Cowboys are like, well, now we can score 40 points because Dak is back. So we no longer have to play football and defense, and we'll give up 24. They've known for the past month they haven't had any room for error, and so that defense is showing up. We'll see whether or not they play disciplined. And given 20 years of recent memory, I just don't have the confidence that they will.
But the difference between like 14 points and 24 points is what, 2 fantasy points, something like that? Like once you get above 14, it's giving up points doesn't really matter.
It's a fair counter argument.
So that's the only thing. I don't always take the defense that like is starting some scrub quarterback because they're doing checkdowns to Christian McCaffrey, and those defenses are always super popular because people look at him and like PJ Walker sucks, which he does. Like, don't get me wrong, but the Panthers know he sucks.
Yeah, I think in season-long leagues where you're looking for kind of like if you're streaming defenses and you're looking for a floor, that's definitely a good tactic. But, here in DFS 1 week.
We're chasing pick sixes. Like that's in GPPs, that's what you're doing. For
sure. So you're right. Like you don't want to face a defense that's only throwing the ball 19 times. You don't want to have Cincy this week necessarily because they're playing Atlanta and they want to take the air out of the ball. Although they are a big home favorite, so maybe you do. John, any other thoughts on defense?
No, I mean, I think we've nailed it. The other obvious defense I think this week is the Packers going up against the Commanders, who will be starting Carson Wentz, his backup. No, I know.
Taylor Heineke.
I was getting there, but I was going to mention that he got hurt last week and so forth. But as of tonight, I've got the Packers only being, I don't know what you've got, Devin, but I've got the Packers only being on only 8% of rosters, and they're about 13% likely to hit GPP value. So as long as they don't get above 13%, they're still a pretty strong play. I will say that the top 4 defenses on the board in terms of value, Buccaneers, Broncos, Packers, and Titans, all look like pretty good plays this week, which is unusual. Normally it's the $2,000 defenses that look good.
7% is what I have the Packers.
Okay. So they're a good play then.
Wow.
If that maintains going into the weekend.
I think at 3,400, people aren't going to want to spend that on a defense on the road even. Right. So I like that call because that I don't see a reason why that, ownership would spike. So good call there. Guys, anything else here before we wrap the show? John, you how about some stacks maybe that we haven't talked about? I know you always talk about wide receiver, driving quarterback. Give us some others that you maybe haven't talked about here before we run it back to Devin.
Yeah, I mean, I think I hit on a lot of them. A guy that's on the model right now, and I'm almost hesitant to say it, but I will Last week he burned me. He had literally 0 points. Marquez Valdez-Scantling had 0 points last week. And he's still the wide receiver 1 for the best quarterback in the NFL, who we didn't talk about on the show tonight. The Kansas City Chiefs are still good, and they're playing San Francisco. I think you could do worse than that stack, but it's a GPP only.
Yeah, makes sense. He did have a touchdown in that game early, called back by penalty, which was a killer. Devin, how about you? Final thoughts, a stack, word of wisdom.
I'm good.
That's that. With that, I guess we'll come to a close as we near the hour mark. We want to thank you all for joining us as usual. Again, please join look at footballguys.com/DFS, join the site. And then of course, we look forward to the engagement on YouTube. Please make fun of Devin for all of his picks and give John and I our grace when we get them wrong. So on behalf of John Lee and Devin Knotts, I'm Ryan Hester saying thanks for joining us and thanks for being a football guy.